As we heard in our readings, the main theme of this Sunday is social justice. The warning is that the selfish and using excess use of God's blessing without sharing the blessings with the poor or the needy or the migrants is wrong. Today's reading stresses the responsibility of the rich for the poor, reminding us of the truth that wealth without mercy for the poor is wrong. And we heard this in our first reading today with Amos, the same prophet we heard of last week when he was condemning Zion for not following the covenant that God had given to them. He gives a warning to those who seek wealth at the expense of the poor and who spend all their time and their money on themselves rather than helping others. He tells them that they will be punished by God with exile from their city because they aren't caring for the poor. And of course, we know because of their sin that they were exiled from Jerusalem for 70 years. People of his time were undisturbed about the evil in their midst. The reason could be that they saw the evil every single day, and after a while, they just didn't seem to notice it anymore. Sometimes, though, we can be desensitized to the wrongs that are happening around us, and we're getting used to it. Our second reading, Paul uses those wonderful gifts, and he says to use righteousness and devotion and faith and love and patience and gentleness rather than riches, and we need to keep the commandments until Jesus returns again. In the gospel, Jesus is teaching us how to use the wealth we have. We can think of all the way back to Genesis when we heard about Cain asking, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And in today's, when we hear about the rich man today, Jesus is saying, yes, we need to watch out for one another. Though we can notice that the rich man in today's parable, they didn't even give him a name. The only one we hear about is the poor man, Lazarus. And Lazarus' name in Hebrew meant God helps, in which God certainly did help him, as we heard at the end of the parable. In spite of having nothing in his life, Lazarus ended up with everything, while the rich man had nothing. The rich man does not do anything wrong that he thinks, but he merely uses the good things that he has for his own life. The problem lies in that he does not notice Lazarus there at his doorstep. How many of the poor in our own world we don't notice? The Pharisees, whom the parable is told for, saw wealth as a sign of God's blessing, while the poor were was being cursed by God. In Jesus' time, the poor were looked down on and ignored. Are we trying to do what we need to do to help others? Or do we not notice the poor among us, like Lazarus sitting on our doorsteps? Or like St. Francis, we are to love one another and take care of the people and the poor, just like St. Francis took care of the leper. The parable teaches us about social justice. It was originally used to answer the question in the early church, why don't the Jews don't want to become Christians and believe in Jesus? And the answer says, in the gospel, in that parable, saying, you have the scriptures and you have the prophets. And then if you remember, the rich man said, yes, but they won't listen to them unless somebody rises from the dead. And isn't that what Jesus did? And yet there's people today that don't even believe, even though it is a basis of our own Christian faith. Jesus repeats the warning against the selfish use of God's blessing, pointing to the destiny of the rich man who neglected his duty to show mercy to the poor and to Lazarus. The rich man was punished not for having riches, but for neglecting what the scriptures had to say. Our eyes open so we can notice the needy that are in our own midst? And how do we show concern for those who have little? Perhaps we could think of the story of Charles Dickens in The Christmas Carol, another example of a man who was stingy and greedy for his own money. And yet, as we know in the story, figures from the past, present, and future came to him to remind him and open his eyes to the concern of those that were poor and needy. We, of course, at our parish, like many parishes, have organizations to help and reach out to the poor. And so we are reminded in our parish about that. And so we're reminded that we need to also continue to give to those that are in need and help the poor among us. So let us, during this liturgy, ask God to open our eyes to see those in need around us. We can't do everything, but we can do something to bring about social justice to those around us.